Chapter 3. Bad News. Magnus's father made him promise to keep their conversation secret. A wise man never shows his hand until he strikes Magnus, and Magnus knew that made sense. Far too much was at stake for him to go around talking about his father's plans, but for the next few days he felt as if he were walking on air, or as if he were a hero from one of the old tales poets sung about in the hall on long winter evenings. Beowulf, perhaps, the great warrior who slew the monster Grendel and became a king. The Earl summoned Magnus to his chamber for more conversations, mostly about the other claimants to the throne. King Sweyn of Denmark and King Harold of Norway were said to have their eyes on England, and so was Duke William of Normandy. He was a true descendant of the Vikings who had seized Normandy from the French 200 years before. The Normans spoke French themselves now, but Duke William was just as hard and as ruthless as any Viking. He was much closer to England than Sweyn and Harold. Normandy was only a day's sailing away from Bosham. There were gifts as well. The promised necklace for Gertha, a thick chain made of Welsh gold, the same for Gunhild. For Godwin and Edmund there were new war spears, 2 each, but for Magnus there was something far more special. Hakon and another housecarl came into the hall bearing a large box between them. They put it down on the rush-covered floor, and the Earl stepped forward to open the lid. "Your brothers already have good war gear, Magnus," he said. "But you went on the war trail last year in a borrowed mail shirt and helmet. It's time you had your own." Then out of the box his father took the finest mail shirt Magnus had ever seen and handed it to him. It flowed through his hands like steel water, its links shining in the firelight. There was a helmet as well, the surface and nose guard inlaid with gold to form an image of a dragon's head. And there were 3 weapons, beautiful in their deadliness: a sword of the best Frankish craft, a dagger with a carved handle, a war axe with a shaft the length of his forearm, and a blade like a great eagle's beak. Magnus's father wanted to be sure the mail shirt and helmet fitted him, so Magnus put everything on and stood proudly before his father. His sisters squealed their approval, and his mother smiled and said he looked wonderful, although there was sadness in her face, but his brothers said nothing. Godwin and Edmund sat staring at him with cold, hard eyes, their arms folded and their mouths shut tight. They cornered him in a dark part of the hall later that evening. Godwin shoved him in the chest, pushing him back against the wall, the logs hard against his spine. "Tell me, little brother, why are you so special all of a sudden?" said Godwin, his eyes full of anger now. "And why is it that your gifts from father are so much better than ours? They're fit for a prince, but we were only given a couple of spears each." "And why are you spending so much time with father?" said Edmund. He shoved Magnus in the chest too, and stood so close Magnus could feel his breath on his cheek, smell the meat Edmund had eaten earlier. "People might think you're being put ahead of us, and that wouldn't be right, would it now?" Edmund went on. "We're older than you, which means we should come before you in everything." Magnus very nearly told them the truth. He liked his brothers and they usually got on well. Of course they bickered and lost their tempers with each other, as brothers do, but they always made friends afterwards. He couldn't break the promise he had made to their father though, not even for them. And what would he say anyway? How could he tell them that they were right, they had been displaced? "It isn't like that, honestly," he said at last. He wasn't used to lying and the words sounded false even to him. "I don't know why father has been so good to me." "Every dog has its day, boys," said a voice behind them. Their father stepped out of the shadows, a smile playing on his lips. "Things are going well for Magnus at the moment, Godwin, but it could be your day tomorrow, or yours, Edmund." "Oh, hello, father," said Godwin, startled. Magnus could tell that he was desperately trying to work out how much their father had heard. "We didn't see you there." "Is that right?" said the Earl, his voice soft. "Well, perhaps you should try and keep your wits about you. A good warrior is never caught unawares." "And what were you talking about? It sounded as if you were having some kind of quarrel." "A quarrel? said Edmund, trying to look confused and innocent all at the same time. No, we were just teasing our little brother, weren't we, Magnus? Magnus shrugged and nodded. Oh, I'm glad to hear it, said the Earl. We should stick together in times like these. Remember, the family must always come first. Godwin and Edmund mumbled in their agreement, and their father talked to them for a while longer, but it was clear they wanted to escape, and he let them go. You did well, Magnus, he said once they were out of earshot, but stand up to them next time. They will accept what is to come if you prove you deserve it. Yes, father, said Magnus, wondering if he could ever be that strong. The next morning a rider came with letters for the Earl, and that afternoon Magnus was summoned once more. His father sat brooding over the same map. How would you like to go and see your Uncle Tostig, Magnus? He said, looking up. I would like that very much, father, Magnus smiled. Tostig was his favourite uncle, and he knew Tostig liked him too. At the age of 7, Magnus had been sent to live with Tostig as his foster son for a year, as was the custom in noble families. Good, said his father. Although this won't be just a family visit, I have an important task in mind for you. Tell me what you know about Northumbria. Magnus stopped smiling and sat up straight. I know that King Edward made Uncle Tostig the Earl of Northumbria a few years ago, and that he rules from the city of York, or Jorvik as the Vikings called it. They ruled there for a long time. It's the key to Northumbria, said his father, and Northumbria is the key to keeping England together. If we lose control of the north, Mercia might be next, and then the whole kingdom could fall apart before anyone can succeed Edward. But Uncle Tostig is a strong, great warrior. He wouldn't let that happen. Maybe not, but there is bad news from the north. The Earl paused and glanced at the letter in front of him. Something is wrong up there in York, yet my brother is too proud and stubborn to tell me what has been going on, and I need you to find out. I won't let you down, father. Magnus loved the idea that the first task he was to perform for his father would be to help his favourite uncle too. Good, that's settled, said the Earl, looking pleased. You will leave tomorrow with a half troop of my housecarls. Hakon will be your second in command. Does that mean I'll be in charge? Magnus felt his stomach twist into a knot. How else will you learn to be a leader of men? Said his father. Besides, you are my son, and a Godwin, and it would not be fitting for you to take a lesser place. Oh, and one more thing, Magnus. There's no need to tell your uncle why I'm sending you to see him. It would be best if you let him think it is just a family visit. Magnus nodded. It was only later that he wondered why this should be. The rest of the day was a whirl of preparation. There were more maps to look at, a route to be planned, supplies and weapons, and armour to be packed. Magnus was soon very grateful to Hakon, who knew what he had to do and get on with it. Late that evening, a servant came to tell Magnus his mother wished to see him in her chamber. She sat wrapped in her blue gown, her eyes soft in the warm candlelight. I thought it best to bid you a mother's farewell tonight, she said, rising to kiss him. You won't want me to do that in front of the housecarls tomorrow. I wouldn't mind, he said, smiling. After all, you are my mother. But now you are entering a world of great men where a mother's love cannot protect you, she said, that familiar look of sadness in her face. I prayed for you last year when you were on the war trail, and I will pray for you again. I have some words of advice for you too. Be careful, Magnus. Things are not always what they seem. Sometimes the Godwins themselves can be their own worst enemies. What do you mean? Said Magnus, his voice small in the shadowy chamber. But she would say no more, and sent him off to his own chamber to sleep. He lay awake for most of that night, brooding on her words.